Fiona wants to know how I went about getting sober from drink, drugs, and adult distractions. All at once, or slowly, and over time. Well, I'm currently approaching 4 years of sobriety from drink, drugs, and the soul-sucking compulsion to bleed my energy over two-dimensional representations of unavailable women. I've learned a lot in my sobriety journey so far, and crucially, it's the importance of choice and self-love. And I'm talking conscious, mature choice and unapologetic, unquestionable self-love in a society which encourages us to degrade our body and our soul for the fleeting acceptance of others, or perhaps the blind imitation of the tragically normalized coping mechanisms that we saw around us when we were growing up. This video is going to be quite a different video for me because I usually avoid emphasizing my personal truth to try and focus on the literature and the research, but I have been asked directly by Fiona about my story. So I'm going to lean into my story, and it will, disclaimer before we go in, it's quite intense. I do not recommend what I'm about to share to most people, and this is something which I've really become quite convicted on, having worked with people in their own addiction journeys. My own inner narrative and my own, I suppose, voice of my soul is pretty intense and it's pretty strong, but I will share my story nonetheless, and my intention is ultimately to try and evoke a sense of empowerment in your heart to maybe make the choice for yourself, and crucially, maintain your sobriety for as many years as you believe that will benefit your path ahead. So, how did I get sober? Crucially, it came in a moment when I was at the end of my traveling time, doing volunteer traveling around Europe, working on farms, different off-grid locations after university, and generally exploring, vagabonding, wandering around, and healing my own dissociative pathway by getting into my body and learning how to use a hammer, saws, and generally do a lot of manual labor. But the moment that came for me, that really woke me up from that state of kind of young man in his 20s who would drink and smoke, and I mean, I first picked up a spliff when I was 15, I think, when everyone else was also doing that. I drank casually at university. I never really got too heavy, but every single week for multiple years there would be some kind of drink or drug entering my system. And of course, the adult distractions were actually my major problem, as the major problem for most young men, because we discover this around age 10, 11, 12, or 13, with an infinite smorgasbord of older women who can provide us something like a feeling of comfort in a very tragically lonely and isolating teenage boy experience. And most men never break out of this. The moment that woke me up, paradoxically and interestingly, was when I found myself in a hippie camp in Portugal. So bear with me on this. I was towards the end of my traveling days, and I had signed up to join a volunteer experience in what looks like an idealistic kind of community moment in a Portuguese hippie camp. Needless to say, there was a lot of drug abuse in this kind of environment, and I found that after the first week of being there, I just couldn't get into the flow of waking and baking every single morning and trying to lay back and sing Kumbaya rather than the actual compulsion that I wanted to follow, which was doing hard work. In fact, interestingly as the story, I remember on the first day that I showed up, there'd been an issue with the electricity, and I picked up the pickaxe and the shovel, and I started laying down some, just me. There was another guy there. I didn't just show up and start doing this. I was under the guidance of someone that had been there for longer than me, but laying down posts and beams to get this electricity wire off the ground because there'd been some flooding, and do a hard day worth of manual labor. And later that week, I also dug a trench at the entrance to the place, and later on dug some more holes. Very much my journey has been about digging holes, and if that doesn't represent the inner work journey, then I don't know what does, but hard manual labor. But I realized soon after being initiated into this hippie camp that that was not the vibe, as they say. The vibe was wake and bake, be fucked out of your face, and wait until the party at the weekend where you can do all kinds of party drugs and feel at one with the cosmos and enjoy casual sex with strangers. Not my thing. I realized after trying a few days in a row, and I thought this was maybe a moment where I could really get back into that feeling that I never really got into when I was a teenager. I always realized that weed made me anxious, and yet I still did it for so many years. And same with drink, I'd often get quite depressed, but I kept doing it. I think it was for a feeling of acceptance, but honestly, I think it was also, again, the imitation of the coping strategies that I saw around me when I was growing up. A moment came when I was about a week into this feeling of being foggy, again, once more, and I will put it as I actually experienced it. My soul awoke inside of me with a righteous, unapologetic, what the fuck are you doing? You are smarter than this, you have more brilliance to give the world, and you are dumbing yourself down, and your light is being dimmed every time that you choose to pick up that substance. I went to the top of a little hill in the area, and you have to imagine like a hippie camp with ramshackle kind of structures and all kinds of dirt and weird vans and all kinds of situations like this. I went up, literally, symbolically, I went to the highest point that I could find on the hill, and actually I was camping on the hill overlooking the hippie camp, rather than joining everyone down the bottom, of course. I can imagine symbolically why I chose to go up on the hill rather than being immersed in it. I wanted that overview perspective, and maybe I'm above it all, but that's my arrogance, who knows, you can make a judgment of that if you want to. Nonetheless, I went up to this hill. I wrote down in my journal, and poetry started flowing through me, and I was very, very angry. It was a moment of awakening in the truest sense. I had completely lost respect for myself in that moment where I chose to diminish my own power, to go with the flow of everyone else, and let my intellect become completely trampled by something like a good vibe mentality, which just isn't me. I know what it means to be playful. I know what it means to have a connection with my body and a feeling of love both for myself and people around me. And every time that I took those drugs, every time that I drank, I knew that the titillating feeling of being stimulated isn't the actual thing itself. And for me, the moment of sobriety was the conscious, soul-awakened choice to fucking respect myself. It's intense, but that's how I experienced it. There'd been many attempts over the years, especially with adult distractions. I'm not saying the word because YouTube doesn't like that word in terms of this video reaching more people. I had tried for many years to try and quit these things, but it's only when the conscious choice truly awoke in my heart and I had the guts to follow it through, but also the compassion to realize where I was still wounded, still very much on my healing path at that time, that I actually chose sobriety, because it's a choice. In having worked with people on different addictions ranging from weed, alcohol, sleeping pills, stimulants, ADHD medications, sex addiction also being another major one with some of the clients that I work with, no matter the tools, no matter the guidance, no matter me being a supportive figure, you will never truly get sober unless you want to get sober. And that seems overly simplistic, but it's not a rational wanting, and it's not just the heart feeling a sense of sadness that you're hurting yourself. It's something like a soulful impulse, a truly healthy version of righteousness, which awakens the feeling of self-love, as self-compassion and self-respect, the feminine, roughly speaking, and masculine principle, compassion, respect, wedded together as action. And that's all it took for me. It took many years to get to that point, but that moment of realizing that I was meant for more and truly being willing to defend that, that's when I started to wake up. However, that's not the full story. Of course, I quit the drink, I quit the drugs, but it took almost another year to finally kick the habit of adult distractions. So what was happening in that lag in between? I hadn't fully awoken the importance of using that energy for something better. The reason that I call adult distractions soul-sucking energy waste is because that is exactly what they are. Interestingly, it was only when I committed to building this library behind me and I had a mission which was truly greater than myself, a purpose which I knew would need every single energetic impulse and every single energetic flow that I could muster to try and achieve this mission, that it clicked, properly clicked in my mind that I need to kick this habit twice per day to adult distractions. What the fuck was I doing? It's such a stupid thing to do, and yet it's normalized. I hate the narrative of this being something which we accept, because it's not human in the truest sense of that word. It's only very recently that we had access to, I'll say it now, I think we're close enough in the video, to pornographic material. If you actually study the history of the invention of the camera, and this is a bit of history coming through, it was around the 1850s that the daguerreotype came through, which is the old school camera where postcards initially started becoming a thing, and it was around the 1860s to the 1870s that we had our first distribution of pornographic adult images, and you can actually look online and see some of these old school studio booth kind of erotic images. And it was interesting seeing what happened in the political climate in Europe at the time. I looked at London as one example, but you had these moralists that were coming through saying this would be the downfall of society because, sure, there'd been erotic literature and there's a huge erotic tradition in terms of many different lineages across the world, but the two-dimensional flattening of human sexuality into something which is consumable and objectified has left a legacy which has truly damaged our soul. And I mean this. There's somewhat of a difference, and actually it's quite a significant difference, sharing an experience with someone that you already love who is expressing themselves sensually with a camera, and you're sharing that in a private space where it's a gift to your lover. And you know what I mean simple language, sending nudes to your partner in a loving, genuinely connective way is a completely different experience from going on a popular adult distraction website and seeing 12 different women in the space of 10 minutes. It dulls your mind in the same way that drink and drugs dulls your mind, and it saps your energy in the same way that spending 4 hours getting high with your friends and doing fuck all also drains your energy. My story of sobriety has been that feeling of autonomy and authentic choice rising inside of me so that I could hopefully do something better with my life. I don't think this is required for everyone who wants to either limit, moderate, or otherwise go their own sobriety path. But for me, personally, I had to get very angry, and the anger eventually dissipated. I stopped being like a volcano that was erupting. I went through my own period of righteousness in the same way that someone who maybe is a new vegan or a new carnivore, they'll go through that period of about 6 months where they proclaim it to everyone that they can meet. It's the same actually with trauma healing. When someone gets on the trauma healing pathway, most often they will, any opportunity they can get to talk about attachment theory to a stranger at the grocery store, they're going to take it. With sobriety, sometimes it requires anger. For me personally, it felt like the righteous anger of the soul, which didn't come here and didn't choose this experience, if you want to take the New Age, faith-based interpretation of incarnation, to fuck around and destroy the vessel that we're blessed to live inside. Approaching 4 years of sobriety now, which is maybe more of a rare thing for someone in their 20s, has been the best choice of my life. And I mean that. I would not have built this wonderful library that I get to share with you. I would not have built a wonderful career for myself where I get to mentor people who are truly brilliant from all across the world. I think I'm working in 4 different continents this week, across many time zones. if I had wasted multiple hours per week for multiple months, thousands of hours of limited time chasing those distractions. It takes self-love, which is self-compassion and self-respect, being soft with yourself and realizing that your behaviors come from a place of wounding, but also being firm with yourself, the healthy father principle, to say, hey, I understand, but we can do better. This is my story of sobriety. I'm not sure how far it will take me into the future. I can't imagine going back to the way that I used to engage with these substances. I have a pretty strong feeling that sobriety is truly the reward that I'm blessed to experience, because I love this feeling of clear-minded, lucid perception, being able to articulate in a way where I'm fluid and very much in motion rather than being stagnated and stuck and blocked up. I think it's worth it. If you're currently struggling with sobriety, and if you've had these stop and start moments where you maybe go a few months without being able to maintain that feeling of truly being in control, perhaps it's a question of not having fully chosen to be sober. There is the trauma work that comes on the other end of the choice, but until the choice is firm, you will not have the conviction to stretch out the multiple years of inner work required to heal those patterns of consumption, which at their deeper level, in almost every single instance, reflect a deep wounding in childhood and a lack of love received from those who should have loved us better. Not to blame anyone, not to be resentful towards caregivers or school teachers or friends and siblings, but simply to recognize the pattern as confirmed by the literature that addictions stem from a feeling of being unloved. So the healing choice is to truly love yourself, as confirmed by your actions, one day at a time. I hope this video has helped. The next video in the series, it's also going to help, and I'll see you over there.